Thank you for taking your time to join us. My name is Serah Luvuno Janji, a holder of BSc Sustainable Energy and Climate Change from the University of Eldoret. I'm a licensed EIA expert by NEMA, a member of the Youth Advocacy, a member of EIK, a member of WOMESA. Currently, I work as an environmental safeguard for Sobocon Associates Limited, which is a consultancy firm working for the COP30 project in Kenya. Kindly, can you introduce yourself, please?
Okay, thank you, Sarah. So my name is David Obura. I'm a coral reef scientist based in Mombasa or Kilifi in Kenya. I'm the director of the organization CORDIO East Africa. We do research on coral reefs in the Western Indian Ocean for the last 25 years. And also in the last few years, I've been doing a lot of work with IPBES, the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, and have become the chair of the platform. So I'm very interested in global sustainability issues and global ocean sustainability, of course. Thank you.
Wow, that's a very good biography. That's good. And I think it's a pleasure meeting you, learning from you. I'm so excited to talk to you. If I may give a brief introduction about the Virtual Ocean Pavilion. It's an online platform that is basically aims to increase the visibility of the ocean in regards to climate change and increase the momentum of COP26, 27, all the way to the oncoming COP30. With that in mind, I think we can just directly go to our questions today. I have a few questions for you that I will be interested to learn and hear from you. If I may ask, what are your expectations about COP30, or what outcomes do you expect from COP30?
Well, COP30, of course, is a critically important milestone in the climate processes, the 30th of the conferences of parties. So we've been at it for 3 decades now, because they're every year. I'm very active on the biodiversity side, so much more on the Biodiversity Convention, originally with coral reefs and other issues. And then now working through IPBES and the assessments that we do, I'm very conscious of the need for strong connections between the climate and the biodiversity or nature agendas, because they are completely intertwined with each other. We can't address the challenges of one without addressing the challenges of the other and the solutions likewise. So I don't pay attention so much to the specific agenda items, because they can become, there's a lot of specificity around them for the climate COPs. But I really hope that the nature climate agenda is broadly addressed at the COP. That's, of course, been the messaging and the intent of the Brazilian presidency of COP30, and hosting the COP in Belém in the center of the Amazon, or the gateway to the Amazon, is a very important way to bring nature and climate together. In IPBES's frameworks, we have a conceptual framework where we look at nature and how it provides contributions to people that support our good quality of life. And carbon sequestration is just one of those 18 classes of contributions. So what we really look towards, and we did the Nexus assessment on it last year, was approved in December, that we really look at balancing all of these contributions from nature. So while we need mitigation and carbon sequestration, how do we do it from nature in the context of food provisioning, of water regulation, of all the other benefits that people need from nature as well, and conservation. So hopefully this COP will really help bring these items together.
Oh, thank you for that. I've heard you talk about carbon sequestration. If I may ask, whose collaboration do you think is most important when it comes to carbon sequestration? Let's say the financing of carbon sequestration, the paying everything. Whose collaboration do you think is most importantly needed?
Well, carbon sequestration is one of the contributions from nature or ecosystem services that's basically a global one, because the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and in the oceans are so mixed all over the planet. You can have carbon sequestration in one part of the planet that also provides benefits to all other parts of the planet as well. So what that means is that we need collaboration across all of the countries, really, to make sure carbon sequestration is utilized efficiently, is optimized, so that nature can do its part in helping us solve the climate crisis that we have really brought through our economic activities. So international cooperation is strongly needed, and that's the whole point of the Climate Convention and the COPs. Just as important is that we need cooperation from the private sector and collaboration, because most of the actual emissions come from private sector activities. So the economic activities and the businesses that we all have and we all depend on around the world. In the past, they've been done with a focus on minimizing costs at all costs, which has basically meant that we've passed the cost on to future generations and to the environment, such as carbon dioxide emissions to the atmosphere. So we also need the private sector to adapt and to bring its emissions down to enable net zero and to help with the absorption of carbon dioxide emissions from the past. And then on the finance side, as you mentioned, the financial system needs to evolve and transform to efficiently account for the cost of carbon, so through carbon credits and biodiversity credits as well, to accommodate the other benefits from nature as well. But they need to be done in with high integrity, so that there aren't carbon credits or biodiversity credits that are fake, basically, or that don't do what they claim are being done, and they can be traded effectively between private sector actors across the world and the public sector as well. So we need all of these to come together. And then lastly, I'll also mention the collaboration that's needed is also with civil society, because of course we are the ones that either have demands and consume all these things in the economy, but then also indigenous people and local communities are very important parts of civil society around the world who need a voice and whose concerns need to be brought to bear. I think the one thing I've realized about COPs in the last few years is we focus on the governmental negotiations, and of course it's the governments that are in the convention and bring it all together. But often it's in the activities and the messaging and the communications and the activism that happen around the COP. So not within the governmental negotiations, but in all the space around in the blue zones and the green zones that are accessible to everybody. These are where there's so much energy and so much innovation is happening, and the commitments of people that go and that's their calls to the world are really important. So let's all collaborate, because we only have the one planet. And let me just say also, because of course, we're talking on the Ocean Climate Platform, is the role of the global ocean in carbon sequestration is critical. It absorbs, the largest part of carbon dioxide that goes into the atmosphere. And we really need to make sure, one, that we don't emit so much that we change ocean chemistry so much, ocean acidification. We have to halt it before it gets too severe. And then also to enable ocean ecosystems to be healthy and provide all the benefits that we need from them, and to safeguard biodiversity also. So we all have a part to play in the collaborations that are needed.
Well, thank you for that. That was broadly explained. I understand that the ocean is one of the major carbon sinks. You just explained about pollutants coming from all aspects globally. Is there an alternative that you have in mind apart from the ocean carbon sink? And what is the contribution of the indigenous communities when it comes to carbon sequestration? Because I think the indigenous communities are basically the minorities. And being that the ocean is a major carbon sink and there is pollutants coming in from everywhere, what is the best alternative as per your own observations and opinions?
Well, for carbon sequestration, so the best solution is not to emit too much carbon dioxide to begin with. So I think we always have to have that as the first call is that we have to reduce to zero emissions as quickly as possible. We've already emitted so much, and carbon dioxide excess levels are a kind of pollution in the atmosphere and the ocean because they change the conditions. So we have to reduce to zero as quickly as possible. The second thing then is, of course, the ocean is a carbon sink, as you mentioned. It's perhaps the biggest, it is the biggest biome, the biggest sink. There are many carbon sinks on land as well. Of course, the tropical forests, we all are very aware of those, the Amazon itself, the Congo Basin in Africa, and the Indonesian or the Southeast Asian rainforests. The thing is, their ability to sequester carbon reduces with more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So the more we emit, the more we undermine their ability to provide this function. There are other, so these are nature-based solutions, or these are nature-based sort of ways in which carbon sequestration can happen. There are technological ways that have been developed and that are being researched, and there's a lot of interest in these because, of course, we may very well need to have artificial methods of taking carbon out of the atmosphere. But we really have to understand the limitations of those methods and their costs, especially when they're done at scale. And currently, there's a lot of, I guess, debates and unclarity and doubt about them being able to be sufficient. So we need to be very conscious of that. And then you asked about the role of indigenous people and local communities. And indeed, in terms of number of people, they are a minority of the global population. But in terms of the areas of nature or territorial space under sort of the traditional or current control or jurisdiction of indigenous peoples, of course, they actually have most of the major terrestrial carbon sinks, so many of them in tropical areas, are under in the territories of indigenous people and local communities. They may not have control of those spaces because of national legislation and laws and so on. But of course, recognizing the roles that they have played historically in maintaining those spaces to be intact and can continue to do that in the future is critically important. So they must really be partners in solutions and ways forward. And then in the ocean space, while people don't live on the ocean in the same way as we live on land, of course, some indigenous communities and peoples really are ocean peoples. In the Pacific, of course, we hear about that a lot. And of course, their roles in understanding the ocean and maintaining the integrity of the ocean so it can be a carbon sink is very important. So that inclusion is critical. And that's beginning to happen in most intergovernmental spaces now. And of course needs to accelerate and increase as quickly as possible.
If I may ask, I'm so much interested in the ocean finance gap. I tend to understand that most of the finances I have come across are basically mostly on land financing, for instance, mangrove planting, renewable energy. What mechanisms do you think can address the ocean finance gap?
Well, for the ocean finance gap, it's true, it's less developed than on land. I think in most cases, we see issues arise in the ocean sort of downstream or later than they have on land. But the truth is that the ocean is as big a sort of economic provider as many spaces on land, all these contributions from nature. So providing food, coastal protection, different ecosystems and so on. We get a lot from the ocean. And while we don't live on the ocean in the same way in terms of jurisdiction and territorial control, some cultures, of course, do have that. But in other spaces, of course, we have the national exclusive economic zones and then the High Seas Treaty. The biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction is just coming into force, so it can provide answers there. I think for nature finance or ocean finance, the economic and financial models we've had have basically only looked at nature as having value when we extract something from it and turn it into a commodity that we buy and sell. And so that's beginning to shift now. So we understand really the benefits that we get from nature for free, and that they shouldn't be free anymore. We need to internalize those costs. So how can we get those benefits from the ocean and from nature recognized in our financial systems as well? So there's a lot of work to do there, but a lot of people are working on that. There's a lot of efforts around ocean accounts. The Global Ocean Accounts Partnership is really looking at that, getting national ocean accounts written up. And for companies and economic sectors that depend on the ocean or on marine resources, for them to really understand the benefits that they get from the ocean. How do we account for those properly in our financial system so that we pay the right amount of money to maintain them is critical in the future.
Okay, coming from Kenya, we understand that there is most climate denial that is occurring in Kenya. What do you propose that can be solutions, or how can other countries be incorporated to understand the solutions when it comes to ocean guidance?
Yeah, well, so climate denial is a huge challenge wherever it's found. And you mentioned the climate denial in Kenya, but actually I would say that the climate denial in wealthier economies is much greater than climate denial in Kenya or in developing countries. And the reason is because in Kenya, many people, don't have much income. They don't have much resources. They're trying to, feed their families today and keep their kids in school in the coming months. And haven't really contributed to the climate problem because our carbon emissions are quite low. But I think it's really in the high income sectors. So within Kenya as well, for example, wealthier actors here, but also in global north countries in the West, where the climate denial is much more impactful because they're not transforming their economies fast enough to account for the contributions to climate change that have been made in the past and are continuing to be made now. So how do we address that climate denial? I think getting people to realize it's not just a remote global problem out there. I have no agency in this issue. Get them to realize it's very personal. The heat waves and the flooding now and the storms that people are experiencing and fires people are experiencing in their local environments, in their cities, that affects everybody all around the world. So get them to realize that these are worse with climate change. So while it's of course difficult to pay for solutions that have the true benefits will come in 20 or 30 or 50 years, but we have to start investing in these solutions now. That's very hard to get people to agree to that in the current environment. There's a lot of sort of skepticism of science and scientists, but I think it's important for the public to realize that skepticism doesn't come from nowhere. It usually comes from private interests that are putting out a lot of false information and fake news and misinformation in order to undermine, the credibility of scientists and practitioners that are calling for change, and that we need to invest now in these things. So, we have to just be strong about and clear about the knowledge and the evidence that we have of climate impacts and how it affects people in different parts of the world, and that investments have to be made everywhere, more where there's greater responsibility and incomes as well, because income gives you a backup. You have some money to help cope with changes. And where people have very little financial resources, of course, they need to be assisted. And that needs to come from, help needs to come from those who have had more to do with creating the challenge in the first place. So in Kenya, I think it's really important in African countries. We, of course, a big response that I see is that, well, we need to develop as well. So why should we stop, using natural gas or fossil fuels and things like that? We do need to develop, but there's so many advantages in starting at a low level and leapfrogging technologies. So bringing in solar and wind in local installations that can be set up for houses or villages or communities. It costs more now, but we need the incentives to be put in place so that can be done, and we can bypass many stages that other more developed countries have gone through that have created the challenge. So yeah, climate denialism is a big problem all around the world, and we do need to combat it as strongly as we can.
That's so interesting and informative. If I may inquire at CORDIO, what basically do you do on a personal level to ensure that science is integrated in ocean climate action?
So in CORDIO, so I'll just explain for the listeners, we are a non-profit research organization registered in Kenya, and we're based in Mombasa in Kenya. And we conduct research throughout Eastern Southern Africa and the Indian Ocean side. And we have focused on coral reefs because we saw a niche there where there wasn't so much being done, and there was plenty to study and understand in terms of climate impacts and long-term decline in coral reefs, but then also very high dependence of small-scale fishing communities on reef systems. And we have a big tourism industry that depends on our reefs and the beaches. So what we have tried to do is, one, to do high-quality research so that we are a research organization rather than a development one. So we do research on basic questions in coral reef health, but also very applied in that it's about, the decline or the survival of this ecosystem that's so important to people. So we've worked with fishing communities for 25 years to understand the fishery dynamics and their vulnerabilities as well, and what their interests are. So we, at one point, I think around 2010, 2012 or so, we had some projects very focused on how vulnerable are fishing communities to coral bleaching and the loss of coral reefs because of bleaching and mortality. And the interesting thing was that we found at the time that, of course, their lives were more directly affected still by other climate impacts. So whether it's sea level rise and salinization of fresh water and wells, or unpredictable rainfall and droughts and flooding on the coast. So we realized we needed to look more generally at the context of communities and their socioeconomic sort of situation than just the issue of climate impacts on coral reefs, so understanding the broader context of that. So we work very much in a I guess a participatory partnership way with communities in terms of helping them understand the bigger threats that are affecting them, and we sort of try and understand and project their context and what they're experiencing to try and find solutions. So that's with local governments, with protected area managers, where fishing is allowed in marine reserves in Kenya, or else to support communities in doing their own protection under locally managed marine areas to help not only for the coral reefs, but also for their fisheries, and to get them to see if these efforts by communities can be recognized under the other effective conservation measures designation of the Convention on Biological Diversity, because this will help recognize the conservation that they do, but also recognize their interests in terms of their sustainable livelihoods and their fisheries over time. So it's a lot of engagement, and the process of doing research, monitoring, and engaging on that with the communities, with other stakeholders, with local and national government is very important.
Thank you for that. From my understanding and coming from a coastal community in Kenya, and CORDIO is working on coral reefs and the protection of the coral reefs. I believe that when you're working with the BMUs in coral reef protection, you tend to have so many barriers that you come across. Can you maybe give me a view of these barriers you come across? And for me, who I'm in the, if I may term it, construction industry, how do you think the construction industry affects the coral reefs? What assignments can you give to me so that I can help in coral reef protection from my end as a person who is working on construction projects that are linked to the ocean, where you are also.
Okay, all right, thank you. So I think, so the first part of your question, talking about, well, we call them BMUs over here, so beach management units. And these are the local organizations, the local fishing organizations that fishermen have been a part of since, this is their cultural institution, well, with a different name within the communities. And the fisheries department realized that they could devolve or give some of the management authority to these fishing communities, because they're stewards of the reef areas, and of course they should be involved in that and have a agency in what happens on the ground or in the water. So these beach management units are mandated and facilitated by the government, but of course they have very few resources to do their work, and very different levels of experience or literacy and years in school for some of the fishers in the BMUs. They incorporate a lot of other activities as well, reef users, sort of hotels and construction along the shoreline as well. So it's actually so when we as scientists or experts or government look at the fishing community and we think of it as a homogeneous entity, it's not, of course. There are many different groups involved and there's many challenges in their social interactions. Some have more opportunities than others and so on. So the difficulties these beach management units have is that they have been given a huge responsibility, and rightly so, but with very few resources to undertake those responsibilities and very little training in how they can go about doing that. So in that sense, we and many other organizations like CORDIO have come into this space, and we might work with specific beach management units or an area of coast and try and support them and support the government in sort of having elections, having regular interactions, making decisions jointly, democratically, and within those who are members of the beach management units, and then carrying forward the decisions like banning illegal gears or destructive gears from the area that they control. It's very hard for the fishers to control that, but how can we help bolster them so that if they report something to the police or to the fisheries department or Kenya Wildlife Service, that there'll be some action on that. So there's a lot of challenges, and of course the resource, the income to manage their own area has to come from somewhere. A little bit of it can come from the fishery itself. Some comes from the government, but then a lot of us in different projects, we try and bring in resources to help build up the beach management unit committees. And so there's also change over time. So many challenges, but it's all the regular challenges that people face. And I think it's one of the things we need to do is to understand between the Climate Convention, we're talking about the climate COP here, but then also from the biodiversity side, there's also FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, promotes fisheries. So that's food production. All these different entities need to come together and support the BMUs jointly to deliver locally, on sustainable fisheries, providing food and livelihoods to the community that protects the biodiversity locally, that enhance carbon sequestration in the mangroves and seagrasses and so on. So all of these global targets or goals need to be met locally. And how do we, enable and help communities to do that? So I think that's the essential challenge with the beach management units. And it's the same for community groups in pastoralist savanna areas or in forest areas as well. How does our community come in to support them so that all these global aspirations we make them realistic and tangible locally, and that there's resources to help make that happen, because there's been a lot of export of resources over time, and we need to bring that back in through finance and capacities. And then I guess that leads to the second half of your question around the construction, development along the coast in the areas that you work in. And I think so. Coastlines are incredibly important for national economies. They are the foundation of local economies on the coasts. The population growth on coastlines tends to be twice the national average, because people, not only the births in the coast, but you get migration of people to the coast because of the ports and the tourism and the hotels and the businesses that set up along coastlines. So how do we do that amount of development without damaging the ecosystem, and the shoreline is just a simple line. You know, it's very, very narrow and very vulnerable to the construction. So the environmental impact assessment process that I think you work in is incredibly important. And it's really important that, one, the government authorities have very high standards for what they need, and high, you know, integrity of decision making. That the experts who do the studies really point out to the companies, you know, you can do this up to this level, but beyond that, you know, the damage is too much. And then there's a whole issue around offsetting impacts in one place with investments or biodiversity investments or credits in another place. How do we do that credibly and in the right way? And then the companies need to realize that actually this coastline is their primary asset. And so it's not in their interest to harm the coastline. So an environmental impact assessment and the constraints that are put on by the government are not, you know, are not a negative thing for their business. They actually help make their business more sustainable into the future. And, you know, you get greater prosperity from doing that.
That was so great to learn and hear from you, someone who has very much experience and knowledge when it comes to ocean matters. I think I'm very lucky to have conducted this and learned from you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for giving us the support. And thank you for getting the youth so that we can also come up with a more ocean solution to mitigate the climate change. I would love to have more conversations with you. Again, I'm so grateful. Thank you for joining.